Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your Audio Amigo, back with another Audio Amigo review for y'all. Whether you agree with his opinions or not, the fact of the matter is, Critical has been one of the oldest and most prolific and passionate members of the IEM hobby, and he's been reviewing IEMs for much, much longer than I have. Although he has a slew of collab IEMs with many different brands, many of which have achieved pretty critical acclaim, he decided to launch his own brand and branch out where he has full control of what he's making. And what we have here is his first full production IEM, the Daybreak, priced at $170 US. While the Meta, which released earlier this year, was a limited edition sort of test product that sold out in less than 2 hours, the Daybreak is in full production, and you can go out and buy one right now. But should you? Is this worth getting? Let's find out. The unboxing experience for the Daybreak is fairly standard. You get the IEMs inside on a foam tray, you get a nice leather carry case, you get a modular cable with 3.5 and 4.4 millimeter connectors, and you get 4 sets of ear tips on nice cards. You get standard bore ear tips in small, medium, and large, and you get memory foam ear tips in medium only, which don't fit me. Leather case is rather nice. It's sort of magnetic closure that I kind of like, with CrinEar branding embossed onto the front. The inside is soft touch, and when it's closed, it's surprisingly crush resistant. It does bow in a little bit, but I would have no problem sticking this in a backpack. It's right on the boundary of what I'll call being pocket size. It'll easily slide into man pockets. Don't know so much about lady pockets, but it is a bit larger than what I would consider pocket sized. But overall, I quite like it. I would say overall this is a good accessories package for $170. Nothing stellar or incredible, but roughly in line with what I expect at this price point. A few more ear tip options would have been nice, maybe a set of premium tips, but it's not essential and it's everything we need to get started. The included modular cable reminds me of the cable that you get on the EPZ P50, which makes sense as the current rumors are that Critical is using EPZ as his sort of ODM/OEM for his products. But yeah, it reminds me a lot of the one of the P50, which I like. It's got a similar 4-wire weave in silver with the plastic coating. It feels good in the hands, behaves well. It doesn't microphonically transmit noise up the wires when it rubs on things. All the hardware is nice, matching sort of black. The amp connection is a right angle, screw-terminated modular termination, which y'all know I prefer. Simple 4-pin. The indexing has a mark right there. You can see on mine, this came right off, which isn't a huge deal. You can just glue that right back on, but it is something that I haven't experienced on the other EPZ cables. I didn't want to glue it back and give the impression that there was nothing wrong. So yeah, see there, just a little bit of glue. Didn't obviously hold up very well there, but that's easy to fix. Not a problem for me in the long run. The chin slider and Y-split. The Y-split is branded with the CrinEar branding. It looks rather nice with the sort of chamfered silver that matches the IEM. The chin slider is functional. It slides up and down a bit too easy, but you know, not a real problem overall. Once you put some tension on it, it holds place. The ear hooks are comfortable. They're not super rough or anything. They feel good for long sessions. One thing is interesting is you'll notice only one of my 2-pin connectors is actually indicated stereo. I think maybe Critical did this to sort of give the impression of like a stealthy connector you can't see R and L from on one. You know what would be stealthy? Colored rings. That'd be pretty nice and maybe a bit easier to see over the top. But yeah, this is a nice cable. I liked it on the P50, and I like it a little bit better here with the black hardware that matches the IEM rather well. So yeah, good cable. So the build quality on the Daybreak I feel is fairly typical for a Tribrid IEM at this price point. These are all resin shells, but they are filled in, making it feel heftier and a bit more durable rather than using tubes. The faceplate as well as the nozzle is metal. The nozzle has a little lip on it to try and help keep your tips from sliding off. There's a metal mesh filter on the inside to protect from debris or moisture intrusion. There is a lack of internal, a ventilation here on the inside of the shells, but that's not an issue because if I pull out my flashlight here, you can see that coming off of the dynamic driver there's another tube. You can see it right there beautifully. And that tube leads to the rear volume and acts as a bypass tube and a vent for that dynamic driver. What that means is no driver flex, no pressure buildup, so it was nice and comfortable overall. That whole rear volume vents out of the front here. There's the hole for the rear volume of all the drivers. Other than that, there's no other acoustic structures or things that affect the tuning. Overall, besides the nozzles coming unglued or the faceplate coming off, I don't really see any weaknesses in the build here. Filled resin shells tend to be fairly durable. I would expect these to last just as long as any other filled-in resin shelled IEM, as long as you take good care of it. But now let's see what makes the Daybreak tick, and unlike the Meta, which never had its driver configuration officially listed, here we have a confirmed setup for the Daybreak. Inside, you will find a single dynamic driver of unknown size and composition, as well as a pair of customized balanced armatures and a pair of microplanars. This tri-bridge configuration is extremely easy to drive, and while the sound does change with higher output impedance sources, it's a more subtle difference, as we'll see later on. I wouldn't go ahead and say that you need to go out and buy a dongle for these. The change isn't massively negative in my opinion. It's not super positive either, and it's more a subtle difference. The nozzles here are just under 6 millimeters in diameter at their widest point, and the shells weigh in at just over 5 grams a shell. This combo should make them pretty comfortable overall, but we'll see about that later as usual. Overall, I'll say the spec sheet is fairly typical of what we're seeing in these DD plus BA plus microplanar tribrids at and sort of above this price range. But now it's time for the cool wall. The Daybreak takes after the Meta in what I'm sure is going to become the sort of classic CrinEar design. That is, understated, simple shells with simple metallic accents and branding. Nothing flashy, nothing super showy, just sleek, cool, and you know what? Honestly, it works for me. I thought the Meta looked cool with its accents matching the cable, and they've done the same here with the same chamfer here on the edge of the shell as you have on the Y-split there. Yeah, honestly, easy grade of cool for me for the Meta. I think that the edges, the milled logo, and everything look really sleek, do just enough to push it into cool as opposed to bland. Good work. Let's go ahead and check in with the Council of Ladies and see how Crinical's first full production IEM does. We're not off to a great start. This is about as split a verdict as you could possibly get. We have 3 mehs, a no, and a yes, this is pretty. I guess this might be pretty. One thing this will not do is start a conversation or get you compliments. 0 votes here for that. I think that's by design. As I mentioned, it's going for sleekness, but as far as their thoughts go, yeah, I'd say they're in agreement here. Sleek, stealthy, boring. Lady number 3 likes that the right and left shells look different at a glance thanks to the different branding. I also appreciate that, but overall, while this isn't what I would call a bad showing for the Daybreak, it's not super positive either, but again, I think that's by design. I think this is a sort of style that will match with basically anybody's tastes. As far as comfort goes here on the Daybreak, this design is very, very similar to what I saw on the EPZ P50. You have a similar comfort wing, a little bit of a valley, and a little bit of bulge going on here for what is very clearly a semi-custom shape. Fortunately, that shape works very well for me. I was able to wear these for long periods of time, writing and editing, no issues at all. I will say, although the nozzle has a lip, I still experienced 2 instances where my tips got left behind in my ears. It was a minority of the time. It only happened twice. I've been listening to these since I got them about a week ago, so I wouldn't say it's a massive problem overall. Those tips are a little bit worn out. As far as my wife goes, she gave these a technical pass. She says that she was able to form and maintain a seal, but that they did feel kind of awkward and large in her ears. A slight tug on the cable would be enough for her to break the seal, and some exaggerated laughter or smiling would also break the seal, hence the technical pass here. She was able to wear these, however, and listen. Like with most semi-custom shaped IEMs, I would say try to audition these before you commit to these. Maybe buy from a store with a good return policy, or go to an audio show where they're on display and try these out before you commit to them. But none of that matters here. What matters is how the Daybreak sounds. Starting off with the bass, Crin is well known for liking bass, so naturally the lower frequencies on the Daybreak enjoy a bit of a boost. In typical Crinical fashion, the bass boost is sub-bass focused, meaning that the low notes in Eminem's Godzilla have really nice texture, good rumble to them. The higher frequency drops in that song also have good punch. It doesn't feel like it's unbalanced in any way. It's very controlled yet engaging bass presentation. The mid-bass has good energy. The bass guitar in Van Halen's You Really Got Me has really nice string buzz and definition. You can see the fingers muting certain notes. All of that detail doesn't get lost in the song. The 2015 remaster specifically, I think, is mastered so that the bass guitar sits a bit more in the background compared to the older mix. While the bass here on the Daybreak isn't what I would call at bass head levels, it's still what I would call a fun, boosted bass presentation that won't disappoint in bassier tracks. The bass is pretty classic for Crin, honestly. Boosted for fun, but not so much that it ruins the tonality. The mid-range on the Daybreak is pretty great. The bass doesn't really bleed into the lower mids, but the lower mids also aren't lean, thin, or anemic sounding. Male vocals and distorted guitars have that great warm tonality that y'all know I tend to prefer. Green Day's Holiday replayed really well here on the Daybreak. The cymbals, the distortion effect on the guitars, the bass drum, the drums, the bass guitar, all of it sounded beautifully clear and well separated here on Daybreak. Billy Joe's unique accented vocal tonality is very well represented here. I didn't feel like his voice was husked or nasaled by the bass or the treble. I just thought it was a really nice overall replay. Sounded like it should, in my opinion. Female vocals are forward, but not so much they feel dominant or overbearing. Aislinn Solheim's vocals and Alan Walker's Faded sounded tonally correct to me, which is all I really care about. There was no husk from the bass again, no nasal tonality from the upper mids. They did sit just above the electronic instrumentation, as I expect them to on this particular track, and her voice had that great ethereal quality that makes the track, and all of its remixes so iconic. The whole mid-range, I feel, is very well executed, all the way from male vocals and instruments to female vocals and cymbals. Mids, really great, honestly. The upper mids and treble are boosted, but again, like the bass, it's not in such a way that it ruins the overall balance of the IEM. Kimiko's rather unique vocals in NaNoWriMo's Hana no Iro are beautifully recreated here. I feel like in more shouty or overly energetic sets, her voice can easily take on a more nasal tonality than usual, and the harmonics that she throws off in her sustained notes can be borderline sibilant and lead to a very unnatural sounding voice. That's not the case here on Daybreak. Her voice sounds basically like how I expect it to. There was no sibilance or sharpness to her harmonics. It was just a really nice replay. In a similar way, the treble is sparkly, but controlled. It manages to feel energetic and airy while not being sharp, fatiguing, or piercing. The hi-hats in the left ear in Simon and Garfunkel's Mrs. Robinson, it can be a highway to fatigue on some overcooked or overexcitable sets, but I feel like the Daybreak kept the energy in those hits while not punishing you for raising the volume and jamming out. Now, that is how I personally, with my ears and my standard Spinfit W1 testing ear tips, heard the Daybreak. By looking at other people's reviews and talking to other people who have listened to this set, it's becoming clear that, like the P50, the Daybreak is a little bit sensitive when it comes to tip and sort of length mode resonance. What that essentially means is, depending on your individual ear canal shape, length, what ear tips you're using, how deep or shallow you mount them in your ears, you might hear sharper peaks in the treble of the Daybreak compared to what I'm hearing. Like with the P50, this can typically be fixed with ear tips, as changing how deeply the IEM is mounted in your ears also changes the location and intensity of those peaks. So if you tend to suffer from length mode issues on other IEMs, particularly the P50, you might want to audition the Daybreak before you buy it to see if you have tips that can tame those length mode issues for you. If, however, you hear the Daybreak like I do, it's overall an extremely natural, tonally correct sounding treble presentation with just enough airiness to make it come across as resolving and sharp, very well tuned, again, at least for my ear canals with my ear tips. While the tuning so far has been excellent, the technical performance is also one of the bright spots for this IEM. Low frequency events like the low harmonics thrown off by D'Angelo's voice, as well as the deep drums and the hand texture on the drum skins in Unshaken, they're all super clear and clean here on the Daybreak. Wonderful texture, good rumble, really nice resolution. The Daybreak also does really well in my typical Waltz for Debbie test. The glassware hits are all where and when I expect them to be. I don't feel like I had to focus as much to hear them. Same goes for the background conversations. They're consistently audible for me, and I didn't feel like I miss any of the ones that I'm typically looking for. The Daybreak, I feel, definitely boxes above its price class in terms of technical performance. It beats the Super Mix 4, it beats the Nova. It doesn't quite have the resolution to beat out the Performer 7, but I would say that it matches the EPZ P50, which again is an IEM that I also feel punches above its price class when it comes to technicalities. Stereo separation is another strong point for the Daybreak. The various drums, guitars, piano, and vocals in Rabbit Rumba's Nuestra Ayer are well separated, and I didn't feel like I was getting a sort of crushed, congested, closed-in, narrow presentation of this track, despite the sort of older style mastering and mixing. The same applies to the Perceived 3D Soundstage here. While I don't think it will elevate more standard mixes by a ton, it certainly won't hold back well-mastered tracks and the positional information that they're mastered with. Dave Brubeck's Take 5 might only be 4 instruments, but it's super easy to place them around you in the stereo field. The imaging here is very solid, and it gives you a really good sensation of depth. It's not the deepest, the widest, or the tallest IEM in this price range. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's also no slouch, and it does about as well, if not slightly better, than other IEMs at this price range. As usual, before we jump into comparisons, let's go ahead and talk about the effects of impedance adapters or higher output impedance sources on the Daybreak. I'll go ahead and pull up the graph. As you can see, impedance adapters basically down tilt the frequency response, making the Daybreak a warmer and slightly more vocal forward IEM, at least to my ears. It's not a change that I feel ruins or drastically improves the character of the IEM, but it is noticeable. So if you feel like your Daybreak is a bit too bassy or is maybe a bit more vocal forward, check your sources. I personally liked the sound of the 30 ohm impedance adapter for a bit of an occasional bass boost, but it's not something that I would roll with every day, if you know what I mean. So, Crin has cooked up what I feel is a very nice IEM here in the Daybreak. It's a more nuanced take on the new meta sound signature, and I think it has great tonality and enough excitement to sound nice with basically any genre of music. Crin's collabs, the great ones anyway, are usually about offering some of the best value at their price points, but has Critical pulled off that trick here? Well, what I've done is I've lined up some of the better all-arounders in this sort of price bracket to see if he's pulled it off. We'll start off with what I think was the most interesting A to B comparison listening session, and what I think is honestly the Daybreak's most serious competition. That is its stablemate, the EPZ P50, priced at what should be $180, but if you live in the US, thanks to tariffs, the cheapest I've been able to find a new pair was $230 on eBay. If you look on AliExpress, these are $300 and something, so these should be $180, which is $10 more than the Daybreak. I call these two stablemates because if those rumors of EPZ being Crin's OEM/ODM are true, then, well, just look at these. Yeah, they're very, very similar. Anyway, these two have a similar price, a similar cable, similar accessories, the same driver configuration, and in terms of tuning, they're also quite similar. They're also both have that length mode issue that makes them sensitive to insertion depth and ear tips. In my A to B testing, the Daybreak was the warmer sounding of the two, a little bit more bass rumble and punch, a little bit more warmth in those lower mids, just a fuller sound compared to the P50. The treble here on the Daybreak was also smoother, a bit more controlled, but I did feel that the P50 had a bit of an edge, a little bit more sparkle with some instruments, and a little bit more excitement up in the treble overall. In terms of technical performance, to me it was a dead heat. Listening to Waltz for Debbie, AB, this one would resolve something, then this one would resolve something. To me, it's a straight up, even in terms of technical performance. In the AB listening, I did end up preferring the Daybreak over the P50 due to a rumblier bass presentation and the smoother treble presentation. And honestly, here in the US right now, the Daybreak is the clear choice due to the ridiculous price difference. However, if you're living in a country where these two are closer or the same in price, I would say if you're not going to EQ, grab the P50 if you want a brighter, sparklier tune, and the Daybreak if you want a warmer, smoother overall presentation. I really like both of these IEMs. As I mentioned in my P50 review, I think both of these are value kings at this price point, at least in terms of technicalities. And if you're going to be EQing these IEMs, just get whichever one's cheaper, honestly. But Omar, I hear you say, Critical's idea of bass is not what I think of when I think bass. Well, at this price point, I think that the KE4s at $200 is probably one of the more popular straight-up meta IEMs, and it represents what I typically think of when I think of the more standard meta-ish IEM tuning. Boomier bass, slightly recessed vocals, a brighter, more energetic treble presentation, just a more V-shaped tonality overall compared to the Daybreak. If you prioritize total bass energy and you're more of a quantity over quality person, you can make a very good case for the KE4. Personally, I feel like the bass texture on the Daybreak is better, and while the treble on the KE4 is more forward and sparklier, I do think that the Daybreak is the more resolving set. KE4 is more contrasty, excitable, it's got more of that traditional V-shaped sound, but you have to go ahead and deal with the tonal compromises that come with that tuning. The Daybreak just sounds more natural, less exciting, sure, but I still personally would take the Daybreak over the KE4, but I completely understand why some people who have more libraries full of bassier genres would prefer the KE4, especially as it's not as prone to those length mode issues as the Daybreak can be. But how does the Daybreak stack up versus my IEM of the year for 2024? That, of course, being the AFUL Performer 7, priced at $240 US dollars. That is $70 more than the Daybreak. In my A/B testing, the Performer 7 was generally the brighter of the two. It had a more detailed, resolving treble presentation. Personally, I also ended up preferring the bass here on the Performer 7 versus the Daybreak. The way they present bass overall is very similar in terms of overall energy and sort of bass quantity. The Performer 7 just came across a bit thumpier and rumblier to my ears versus the Daybreak, and it had a bit more bass quality in my opinion. The Performer 7 does not have the same sort of length mode issues that the Daybreak can have, but with the intended tuning, I have seen many people describe the Performer 7 as more fatiguing, particularly in the upper treble. The Daybreak is more forward with female vocals and is a bit fuller in the mids, at least to my ears. That makes it come across as a bit more mid-centric compared to the Performer 7. To me, the Performer 7 is a more technical set, as I mentioned, but it's also $70 more than the Daybreak. So overall, while these two sets offer similar value in that they both box much above their price class in terms of technical performance, this is $70 more. Personally, while I prefer the Performer 7, the Daybreak, I think, at $70 cheaper can be a fantastic alternative, especially if you prioritize technical performance. But now we're bringing out the big guns. This is one of my favorite sets of 2025 so far, the Softears Volume S, priced at $320 US. A being these two was an interesting proposition. I feel like the mids and treble on these two are extremely similar. Very, very similar overall. The Daybreak is maybe a hair brighter, but it balances that out by also having more punchy sub-bass rumble and just overall more bass. The Volume S is packing some extra heft in the lower mids, giving it that lusher, richer tonality there that I tend to prefer, but overall I would say that the Daybreak is a bit more V-shaped compared to the Volume S. If you're looking for a natural sounding set, then the Volume S I think is the more tonally correct of the two, at least for my ears, the way I hear them specifically in the lower mids, but the Daybreak in my opinion is the more engaging sound, especially if you like a more intense bass presentation. In terms of technical performance, honestly, I think the Daybreak will match or exceed the Volume S, but the Volume S isn't about technical performance, it's more about tonality and sounding sort of correct rather than being engaging or super technical. If you were attracted to the Volume S, specifically the way that it did the mids and the treble, the Daybreak can provide that with a more engaging, bassier listening experience for a little over half the price of the Volume S, so really interesting comparison, those two. So time for the wrap-up. In terms of overall tonality, the Daybreak and the P50 are very similar. The Daybreak is a bit warmer, and both can have length mode issues that lead to a more fatiguing treble presentation than is intended for some listeners. But I think both of these are very, very good overall. The more V-shaped alternative would be the KE4. It trades technical performance and tonal accuracy for a more contrasty sound presentation with boosted bass and more energetic treble. The bass is softer in terms of texture, and the treble isn't as refined, but this is a lot of fun, and it's still a fantastic all-rounder. All the sets on this table, honestly, are fantastic all-rounders. The Performer 7 is, in my opinion, the most technical IEM here. It's the most resolving, at least to my ears. It's not as vocal forward as the Daybreak, but it does have a brighter, more detailed tune that may be a bit smoother overall. However, it is $70 more, and that is a decent chunk of change. And then finally, the Volume S. It's the most neutral, sort of natural and correct sounding IEM on the table. It's not going to win any technicality awards, but it just sounds so sweet, so correct. Daybreak is a little over half the price, though, and it's very, very similar in the mids and treble. This is another case where all the IEMs on this table are fantastic, and I really like all of them, so if you have any of these, well done. All that remains now is to pull up the Audio Amigo rating scale and figure out where the Daybreak is going to land. In my opinion, CrinEar accomplished what he set out to do. He's given us one of the more tonally correct and technically proficient IEMs that you can get for $170. Like the EPZ P50, it's a fantastic blend of good tonality, good technical performance, and all-round tuning, wrapped up in an affordable, comfortable package that will serve essentially all genres and users. The carry case is quite nice, the cable is solid, the included ear tips could be better, but overall I would say this is an extremely solid IEM that punches above its price class for sure. Only real fly in the ointment holding this back is the same issue that holds back its $10 more expensive stablemate, the EPZ P50. That is the potential length mode issues that can cause fatiguing treble for some users with some ear tips. Like the P50, some people will be able to fix this with swapping ear tips, but some people won't, and that's going to be the only thing keeping this IEM out of the top ranks. The CrinEar Daybreak, like its sibling, the EPZ P50, is going to go in "This is brilliant" because it honestly is a brilliant listening experience. It's got what I feel is an even more all-rounder, more consumer-friendly tuning than the P50. I prefer it generally over the P50, while also costing $10 less at MSRP than the P50. I think it looks better than the P50, and I think Critical has a real winner on his hands. I can't say I'm surprised. His great collabs greatly outnumber his head scratchers, and all of his great collabs are still recommended to people to this day. So yeah, well done. So who do I think should buy the Daybreak? Well, honestly, I think this IEM will make a lot of people very happy. It isn't a straight up bass headset. I think that bass heads will be disappointed with the sub bass and mid bass on here, even though it is quite good. And I think treble heads will want a bit more sparkle or just energy up in the treble in general. But I think it's good for me on both ends of the spectrum. The overall tonality is fantastic and very correct, but I wouldn't describe it as natural or neutral due to the sub bass boost and the forwardness that it can have with some female vocals. So those of you looking for a studio IEM for like mixing and mastering might not want this. Outside of those people, however, I think the Daybreak will be the answer to a lot of questions. I think it makes an absolutely fantastic all-around IEM. If you're looking for what I think some of the greatest technical performance under $200, I think this and its relative, the P50, should be at or near the top of the list. I think the Daybreak makes a fantastic one-and-done IEM if you're looking to stay under $200 for just a daily driver to use for everything. This sort of tuning and tonality will suit essentially all genres and types of music, and it works great at low and high volumes. It's just really great. Finally, if you're a Critical collector, well, you probably already have your unit, so you can at least rest easy that this is one of the good Critical IEMs. And that's going to do it for this one. The second IEM from CrinEar is a real winner. For those of you wondering, yes, I do have a Meta. I have number 098. I chose not to review that at the time as it was no longer available for purchase, and models on the secondhand market are a little bit above the MSRP for those. If I ever get my head above the water from all of these review units that I'm getting sent, I will review it, I promise. I know I said this video was going to be for the Meyer Audio Slevo 224, but my channel manager demanded that I push the Daybreak review out as soon as possible. So next time for sure we will do my first ever Meyer Audio IEM review starring the Slevo 224. But for now I want to go ahead and say thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for your continued support. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.